The night the Duke arrived, the rain fell like a verdict, heavy and cold, drenching the roses that lined the iron gates of a crumbling estate. Two sisters stood beneath the portico, one glowing with practiced beauty, the other fading into the stone like a shadow no one bothered to notice. Their father's voice, sharpened by desperation, carried through the storm as he urged the noble visitor to take the pretty one, the valuable one, the one who could save them all. But fate, quiet and unannounced, had already turned its gaze toward the rejected sister, the one no one ever chose, and in that instant the world began to tilt toward a different ending. If you believe in kindness and second chances, and in the quiet power of being seen for who you truly are, take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us why compassion still matters. The estate had once been alive with laughter and light, but years of poor harvests and worse decisions had hollowed it out. Paint peeled from the walls like old scabs, and the wind whistled through cracked windows as if mourning what had been lost. The father, once a proud landowner, now wore his dignity like a borrowed coat, frayed at the edges and too thin for the cold. He had raised his daughters with unequal hands. The elder Clara was praised for her symmetry, her hair like polished chestnut, her smile trained to open doors. The younger Eleanor learned early to move quietly, to soften her presence, to accept that love was a currency spent elsewhere. She had a crooked smile and eyes that watched rather than dazzled, and a habit of listening that made people forget she was there. When word came that a duke sought a wife and would tour the region, hope returned to the estate like a rumor. The father polished what little silver remained and rehearsed gratitude in the mirror. Clara was dressed in silk borrowed from a neighbor, her posture perfected by years of expectation. Eleanor wore a simple gown mended at the seams, chosen not for beauty but for invisibility. She told herself she was content to stand behind her sister, content to be useful, content to be overlooked. Yet beneath that practiced humility lived a small H that flared whenever she imagined a life chosen rather than assigned. The Duke arrived without fanfare, a man marked by loss rather than indulgence. He had buried a brother to war and a mother to winter, and the weight of responsibility had settled into his shoulders. He was known for his fairness, not his warmth, and for a patience that made others uncomfortable. As the rain fell, he took in the estate with a careful eye, noticing the cracks hidden by ivy and the way the father's hands trembled when he bowed. The father gestured eagerly toward Clara, presenting her as one might present a prize mare, listing virtues that glittered on the surface. Eleanor stood to the side, a stillness in her that felt like a held breath. The Duke listened, and in listening, he noticed what was not said. He saw the way Clara's smile faltered when attention drifted, the way her eyes searched for approval like a compass needle gone wild. He also saw Eleanor's hands, roughened by work, steady and sure. He saw her eyes lift once, briefly, not in plea but in curiosity, and then lower again, respectful of boundaries she had learned never to cross. Something in that restraint stirred him. He had been surrounded by performance all his life, by people who wanted something from him. The quiet girl wanted nothing, and that absence felt like honesty. Over the following days, the Duke stayed, citing weather and the need to rest his horses. The father saw opportunity and pressed it with clumsy insistence, arranging walks and dinners that showcased Clara's charms. Eleanor was assigned tasks that kept her busy, yet the Duke seemed to find her anyway, in the garden at dawn, in the library dusting shelves, in the kitchen kneading bread with a focus that bordered on reverence. He asked about the estate's history and listened when she spoke of seasons and soil, of what it meant to tend something fragile and hope it survived. She spoke plainly, without adornment, and her words carried the weight of lived experience. Suspicion grew like a bruise. The father noticed the Duke's attention wandering, felt control slipping through his fingers. He doubled his efforts, praising Clara louder, dismissing Eleanor's presence with a wave. Eleanor absorbed these moments as she always had, swallowing the sting and reminding herself that survival required silence. Yet something was changing inside her, a warmth she did not dare name. Being asked, being heard, felt like a door opening to a room she had never been allowed to enter. She began to stand a little straighter, to meet the Duke's gaze without apology, to imagine a future that did not hinge on being useful or invisible. The choice, when it came, arrived quietly. There was no announcement, no gathering of witnesses. The Duke asked for a private moment and spoke of partnership, of shared labor and mutual respect, of a life built on truth rather than display. He did not promise ease, only honesty. Eleanor listened, heart pounding, aware of the storm that would follow. She thought of her sister, of her father, of the way the world punished those who stepped out of line. She thought of herself, small and steady, and the years she had spent shrinking. For the first time, she chose to step forward. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The father raged, his fear transforming into blame, accusing Eleanor of betrayal and ingratitude. Clara wept, not only for the lost future, but for the way it confirmed her deepest fear, that beauty alone was not enough. The estate felt colder, the walls closing in with the weight of unspoken resentment. Eleanor packed her few belongings with hands that shook, knowing that leaving meant losing the only home she had known, even if that home had never fully wanted her. The Duke did not shield her from this pain. He stood beside her, present unwavering, allowing her to face the consequences with dignity. The journey to the Duke's lands was long, marked by landscapes that unfolded like promises. Eleanor watched fields turn greener, villages grow livelier, and wondered if she belonged in such abundance. Doubt followed her like a shadow, whispering that she had been chosen by mistake, that she would be found lacking. The Duke, attentive without smothering, invited her into the rhythms of his life. She learned the language of stewardship, the balance between authority and care, the patience required to mend what neglect had broken. Mistakes were met with guidance rather than scorn, and slowly trust took root. Life did not transform overnight into a fairy tale. Eleanor struggled with the weight of expectations and the ghosts of her upbringing. She flinched at raised voices, apologized too often, worked past exhaustion. The Duke noticed and adjusted, creating space for rest, encouraging boundaries, valuing her counsel in matters both great and small. In time, the estate flourished not because of grand gestures, but because of countless small acts of attention. Crops improved, disputes were settled with fairness, and the people began to see their new lady not as an ornament, but as a partner who listened and acted with quiet resolve. News from her old home arrived sporadically, carried by merchants and chance encounters. The father's pride had cost him allies, and the estate continued its decline. Clara married well enough, but the union was hollow, built on appearances that faded with familiarity. Eleanor felt no triumph in these tidings, only a complicated sorrow. She remembered the girl who had been praised and pitted against her, the man who had taught them both that worth was conditional. She sent aid discreetly, refusing to let bitterness define her generosity. Healing, she learned, was not forgetting but choosing kindness anyway. Years passed, marked by seasons that turned reliably, by a partnership that deepened into love grounded in respect. Eleanor's presence changed the Duke as much as his had changed her. He learned to soften, to laugh more freely, to trust that vulnerability did not weaken authority. Together they weathered losses and celebrated gains, always returning to the simple truth that had brought them together. Being seen, being valued, was the foundation upon which everything else rested. As you near the end of this story, if it has stirred something within you, if you have felt the ache of being overlooked and the hope of being chosen for who you truly are, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs reassurance, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Before the final moments, I invite you to leave a comment below sharing what part of Eleanor's journey resonated with you most, or a time when kindness changed the course of your own life. The rain that had marked the beginning returned years later, gentler this time, nourishing rather than punishing. Eleanor stood at the window of a home that felt earned. Watching the land she helped heal breathe under the sky. She thought of the girl she had been, standing in the shadows, and of the man who had looked past what was presented to see what was real. The world had told her she was second, replaceable, unworthy of choice. Life, patient and persistent, had offered a different lesson. Sometimes the rejected sister becomes the heart of the story, not by demanding to be chosen, but by choosing herself, and in doing so, changing everything.